Hi.
Hi. Hi.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm here with you again. Rumor has it that there is a big event coming up in 2025. What is it?
Well, we became aware of the fact that Kerygma Ventures as an organization has been in business for 50 years.
50 years. I thought you were just 50 years old.
Well, we started it when I was in the crib.
Actually, I'm 50. I'm turning 50 this year as well. So
Happy birthday.
Well, thanks. But Kerygma Ventures is my whole life, spans my whole life.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. We get to celebrate together.
Well, good. Well, I am excited about it. I mean, there's something to be said about being continually in business, if you want to call it that, for 50 years.
More than business, ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah, to make it in ministry for 50 years. I'll just go ahead and say congratulations. There's very few that are able to make it that long in ministry. And
congratulations to you. You've lived through it all.
I survived you being in ministry for 50 years. Or really, you've been in ministry longer than that. We celebrated that a long time ago because you did start really, really young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I started when I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
But then in college days, I traveled. I had my own crusade team made of fellow college students, and we had a music guy who did the choirs and an orchestra pianist and a guy who worked with the kids. And then I was kind of the primary preacher. And we did crusades all over the South.
Right? As a college student?
As a college student.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Then when Betsy and I went to seminary, you can't really be a seminarian and travel all over at the same time.
Mm.
So we became pastor of a little church in North Fort Worth, the Dixie Heights Baptist Church.
Yeah. I've heard lots of stories about Dixie Heights.
Yeah. It was great training ground, wonderful people. And they'll get special crowns in heaven, I'm sure, for putting up with seminary level preachers, pastors. So, and I was one of them. So they taught me a whole lot more than I taught them. And then at the end of our time there, that was a crisis time because I felt like God was calling me to go into a traveling ministry. Not exactly like we did in college, because in college, what I remember is I would be worried about the people who would make decisions at the altar, knowing they weren't going to get much follow-up. Mm-hmm. So I remember going back, we'd drive back home on Sunday night after finishing a youth crusade on the weekend. And the rest of the team would be talking about, man, we had 150 people, converted, or we had whatever the number. And I was always rejoicing in that, but I'm thinking, what's going to happen to them now? Because a lot of them were kids, high school kids.
It's interesting that, you were still young at that point, very young. And it's interesting that you say that was weighing on you even then, because I think so many people get focused on the numbers. How many commitments did we get? How many salvations, how many people did we dunk? Focused on that number, and you were already concerned about discipleship. You were already like, wait, this is the beginning, not the destination. Yeah. And what do you account that to?
Well, I don't know, other than the call of God and, him specifically putting you in this area, which I think he does. But the other that was my experience, because I became a Christian when I was 12. Mm-hmm. And then nobody said here, so I just went to church.
Yeah.
And it was only when I was a freshman in college and began to understand something about living out the Christian life, because it was a struggle up to then. It was like, okay, you're saved, you're going to heaven, all that settled now. Do your best.
You need to be better.
Be a good boy and do your best. But when I was in college, my brother invited me to go to a youth camp, and I heard I went as a counselor. I went because you heard this story many
Pure
times.
motives, you went.
Pure motives.
Pure motive.
Pure
Yeah.
motives. He said we needed a lifeguard at the pool, and there'd be like 1,500 girls there.
Mm-hmm.
What he didn't tell me, they were all junior high girls.
Whatever it takes to get you there.
I guess. But anyway, being a counselor, I would sit every day and listen to a friend of the family and a seminary professor, but who understood about the Spirit, about the Holy Spirit, about being filled with the Spirit. And Dr. Lewis Drummond, he knew me, and so he would pick on me. He would teach something. He'd go, now, Dudley, tell me what you learned. Well, I'd always go back to, well, you got to be more committed and more, and he'd go, no, that's not what I'm saying. So he made me rethink through what does it mean to live out the Christian life. So after that experience there, that week at camp.
Let's just stop and say thank you, Dr. Drummond.
Yeah.
So he discipled you in the classroom.
Yeah.
And in youth camps and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I went back, and that was my interest, and so because that was my interest, that's the kind of books I read, and those are the kind of people I followed, and those became my mentors and so forth. And so I was always interested in, okay, how do you live now that you've got it?
Yeah.
And so that's what I've been about ever since.
Hi, I'm Dudley Hall with Kerygma Ventures. I would love to send you a weekly word from me. It lands in your box on Friday morning. What I try to do is cover what's happening in the world, regular events, but cover it from a biblical standpoint, a biblical worldview. And I would love to send it to you. So if you're interested, please sign up.
Interestingly enough, the first name of Kerygma Ventures was Successful Christian Living Ministries.
It was a tongueful.
Way too long. But think about it. That describes the method.
Yeah.
Successful Christian Living Ministry. So it's talking about how do you do it? How do you?
Right.
Well,
how do we walk this out?
Somewhat 15 years ago, we decided that we wanted the focus not to be on a method, but on a message.
Yeah.
Because I increasingly discovered that the message is what disciples you.
Right.
Not the man.
Right.
And that if you hear the gospel, the real gospel, and it explodes in your being, it creates the motive as well as the method.
Yeah.
And so we changed to Kerygma Ventures because Kerygma is the word to describe that announcement of the gospel, that God has done something in history after which nothing will ever be the same, and it's so great you've got to make a decision about it.
Yeah.
So that's what Kerygma is.
Okay, now you're jumping way ahead. Back up to Successful Christian Living Ministries. So 50 years it started as Successful Christian Living. Where did that term come from? I know you say it's the method, but there's a cute little story about how it actually became the name of the ministry.
Okay, so let's go back to the camp, youth camp, where Dr. Drummond was our teacher. James Robinson was a youth evangelist, and he was the preacher. So that week, he and I became friends. And when I was in seminary, he and I would talk often. He was doing large crusades in cities and so forth. And so he would say to me, how would you follow up? How would you get these people that are making decisions? How would you get them going? Get them in churches, get them disciple, whatever. So I developed a follow-up program for his crusades.
Like a curriculum, like a workbook
and a program, so that I would go in 10 days after the crusade, after we had taught the pastors how to contact all those people and get them to come to a seminar. I would personally go into that seminar, and for 10 hours, I would teach on the basics, just getting the basics.
10 hours?
Yes.
Wow.
Over a weekend, starting Thursday night.
That's intense.
And I would get on the plane on Sunday or Saturday, whatever it was, and I could barely walk down the aisle.
Yeah.
I've been standing. But anyway, that the name of that curriculum that I used was Master Plan for Successful Living. So, and it was just laid on my desk one day when I was talking to our attorney, and who was trying to get our 501c3 through the state and legal papers. He said, I need a name for this. What do you want to call it? Dudley Hall Ministries? And I said, no, JB, we want people to give to it. And if we name it Dudley Hall, people will go, what is that?
What is that?
So I said, no, let's call it. I looked down and went, let's call it Successful Christian Living. And so it wasn't a prayed over deal. It just happened to be there.
Yeah.
And I had planned to change it within a year or two. Once when we thought about it, prayed about it, and came up with a good name. But we just were too busy. So we just left it Successful Christian Living for 30-something years.
And it is what you were doing. It was the, like you said, the method of this is how we are discipling. This is how we are growing Christians who have been. Okay, I want to back up even a little bit more. For anyone who's younger than me, they may not, when you say the calling, like I was called to ministry. Okay, you started ministry at 16 years old. So for people younger than my age, they may not be familiar with what does that mean to be called? Talk us through a little bit just about your calling. How did you know that you were called to ministry and know that ministry was what the Lord had for you for your life? Because your other option was, as this was the way I've heard it, your other option was medicine.
Yeah. Well, the calling is the specific assignment that God gives to all of us. So there's a calling on all of us. Now, sadly, when I was coming along, calling was only used to talk about people going into ministry. So you're either called to be a pastor or a missionary or a music director, which that got eliminated real quick for me, or educational director or, whatever. And so that was my concept of calling. It wasn't long before I understood God calls everybody.
Yeah. Even medicine.
Yeah. So I was interested in medicine. And one of the reasons is I was born when my parents were older. My mom was 44 when I was born. And it would tear my heart out when she would get sick. And I would want to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I remember standing over her bed going, I wish I knew how to fix it. Mm. And so I was like, well, I'll be a doctor. And plus, the brain always was so fascinating to me. So
it still is.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
Now, being, young and ignorant, I thought being a brain surgeon would be the way to understand the brain. Mm. I later found out they're just working on flesh.
Yeah.
What I was really interested in is neuroscience.
Right.
But I didn't know that at the time.
Psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all of my planning, as I would talk to counselors in high school, is like, I'm going into medicine. And they affirmed it because I did well in math, science and all that. And so that was my plan. In fact, when I came down to choosing colleges, all of them had to have a pre-med, or I didn't even consider them. Yeah. And I was being offered some football scholarships, and so I limited it down to schools that had pre-med school. So the primary one, grew up in Alabama, was University of Alabama. Of course, Baylor in Texas got interested, and they had stuff, and Georgia had some stuff, but I eliminated all the ones that didn't have pre-med to it. So I thought my calling was being medicine. But that increasingly became uncomfortable with me my senior year in high school. And I didn't want to be a preacher because it looked, this is not true, but my appearance was preachers lead boring lives. Like they have to wear suits all the time. Back then you did. And you go to lots of meetings, and a lot of them are like missionary meetings with a bunch of women, you know, sipping tea and talk, and weddings and funerals, and then you preach on Sunday. And the other times, you know, you're out.
Because that's what you had seen.
That's what I'd seen.
The country
preacher, yeah. So it's like, please, Lord, let me do something a little more exciting than that. And so when I got so miserable in it that I said, okay, whatever you say. And I will say that it wasn't that I said, okay, I'll be a pastor, I'll be what. It was like, I'll just do whatever you say. It doesn't matter. And so then I said to the schools, I'm not going to pre-med school. You know, I'm going to study ministry, study theology. So then I limited the schools that were talking to me down to Christian schools, Christian-based schools. So Baylor, Samford, Howard Payne, Furman, some of the ones, of course, I was Baptist. I thought.
Had to go to Baptist. Yeah.
So I wound up going to Samford University in Birmingham. It's close to home and it was a good school. So that's where I did have a scholarship. I played football there for a while until I got hurt. But that's where I started doing those crusades.
Okay, let's drag Uncle TD back into the conversation. You mentioned him taking you to youth camp when you were 16, because he plays a big part in successful Christian living ministries as well. So when you were going to college, Baptist college, where was he and what was he doing at that time?
TD had come to Texas earlier to go to seminary, and he had stayed in Texas, and he was pastoring, had pastored several large churches, and at that time he was pastoring First Baptist Church of Hurst, Texas. Okay,
so he was already full in ministry.
Yeah.
And for those who don't remember, he's significantly older. He's
16 years
16 years older. Okay.
So interesting enough, you know, he would try to help me, and when I finally said, yeah, I'll be a preacher, and I knew nothing about it, he would send me outlines and stuff, you know, which were helpful.
Well, so he's discipling as well. He's encouraging.
And he would recommend books to me.
Yeah.
Once he discovered I was interested in spiritual growth and transformation and stuff, he would send me the books that I read that changed my life. You know?
Yeah.
So, and then, so he invited me to come to that camp. And then once how fast you want me to go here?
Go. I'll back you up if I need you.
Okay, so then Betsy and I go to seminary, and 3 years there, and we pastored a church during that time. And by the way, Betsy was a great pastor. Mm-hmm. I mean, she cared about the people. Mm-hmm. She didn't mind the programs. I hated the program. I love the people, but I hated running those programs. And if you're a Baptist, you got to run a bunch of programs.
Yeah.
They're already in place, and you don't have any choice about it. Even if they don't work, you got to run them.
Yeah, you got to do them.
So she didn't mind. So we had a successful time there. But at the end of that, when I decided God called me to go into traveling and trying to help churches and pastors learn how to disciple their people. So after I was following up James Robinson's stuff, and I would get invitations to come back to the city. Well, can you come back and do it again? We'll have more people here next time. And so that kind of stuff was happening. So TD saw that God's hand was up on that. And so he said, why don't we work together, and I'll help you set up those meetings, because a lot goes into setting up those big
stuff,
meetings. Yeah. So I'll do that, and then and I'll also do revivals and preach, whatever. So he and I worked together. We together founded Successful Christian Living, and we had no money, and so our agreement was, and he had a family by then, so his faith had to be bigger than mine.
Yeah.
And so our deal was, whatever money comes in, we'll split it. If it's $2, you get one, I get one. If it's $2 million, which never did happen. But to his credit, it's like, yeah, we'll just, whatever, we'll split it up. So for years, Successful Christian Living was me and
Uncle T.D.
T.D. So I got to work with my older brother, which was really a blessing because growing up, he's 16 years older, but I didn't remember him at home. He was gone to college before I could remember. I remember him coming back, but he was a big brother I never knew. And then when he and I get to work together, that was quite a privilege.
Yeah. And again, more discipleship.
Yeah.
Discipling. And then it starts working both ways, right? Where you're reading and challenging him and he's telling you to read this and you're thinking through things and talking it together and going to churches together sometimes and conferences together and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.